Welcome to Season 4 of the Powered by Rock podcast. We'll bring you the best stories in rock music with a focus on highlighting independent rock musicians and their music from all over the world. No, rock music isn't dead. It's getting better and better. It's just time for you to start paying attention again. With that said, let's get this party started.
The mountain's gonna rise and fall by me.
Hello and welcome to the Powered by Rock podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Kuhlman, and I wanted to actually spend a bit of time today to catch up on the year of 2023 so far, because there have been some phenomenal rock albums basically put out this year. And if you haven't been paying attention, you may have missed some of them. So that's what this entire episode is going to be about, the top 10 rock albums from the first half of 2023. So basically January to June 2023, what are the 10 best albums of the year so far? You're going to get albums from very well-known bands who are putting out pretty damn good stuff, some of the best of their career. And then you're also going to get some albums from bands you definitely haven't heard of, or maybe you've heard of them, but you just haven't listened to them yet. Obviously, at the end of each year, we also do an award ceremony called the Powered by Rock Music Awards, and any albums missed from now until December have their chance to essentially move into the nominations for each category that we do there. But I always think it's fun to dig in early and not have to wait a full year to get some good music recommendations. I'm also going to give a list of honorable mentions that you should check out in the show notes below this episode as well. So let's jump into the recommendations in no particular order. So don't think this first one just means that it's the best one, but make sure to stay to the end to get my insight for each album as well. So the first one, pick number one, I'm going to suggest is the album Underwater by Wicked Bears. So some of these ones I actually have vinyls for. So you'll see, Wicked Bears vinyl there, got it signed by the band. They're pretty cool dudes. So I highly recommend you checking out this album. But Underwater is essentially the, Wicked Bears is a Salt Lake City trio. These guys are some of the most incredibly talented punk musicians out there. They write some of the most cleverly crafted albums in the pop punk genre. So much so that the first and last song on this particular album sort of bookend the entire album. It's kind of like a preface, whatever you want to call it, preface. And then you got your like epilogue at the end that kind of ties it all together. And they do it in a really clever way where I think the song, let's see, what is it called? Still Underwater. So it's Underwater and then Still Underwater. And Underwater is kind of like, setting everything up. But at the end on Still Underwater, they actually sing like some of the best lines from each of the songs on the album, which kind of makes some weird like melody that like doesn't fit, but it still really works really well in like a, like in a kind of like a show tunes medley, how they do that. So it works. Like they managed to fit their songs into this new melody on the last song, but it's one of those clever things that you just don't hear, especially in punk genre. You might hear that in, a very anthemic rock band, very high production value, somebody who's thinking really, really far outside the box, or, even like an independent artist doing a concept album. But this album is done in a way that, it kind of, like I said, bookends with those two titles, or with these two tracks. Every song on this album in its own way is great as well. And the best part is the songs are not the same tempo all the way through, like a lot of skate punk might be. It's built on this. It's not built on the same formula, which I've talked about being an issue for a lot of other punk bands and a lot of other punk albums lately as well. But a really good part of this is that the album plays like an album should. The track list and order is great. And if you have the vinyl and know what a good side ender sounds like, you'll get that from, a song like Lies, and then another great side starter in Max on the B side. Lies is one of my favorite songs on the album as well. Also for, just for those fans who are fans of Easter eggs, the vinyl actually comes with some pretty interesting secondary names for the songs, such as on the song Terms and Condition, it's also called Cameron's Last Stand, or All My Best Friends Are Mariachis. So you get a cluster of new names for some of the band's, titles on this track or on this album. But my personal favorite song on the album, likely because it's the one I probably played the most, but it's also just a really, really catchy, upbeat, like kind of like a party song, because it even starts out with that. But it's the song Lucky, and this is an absolute banger. It starts out like an anthem rock song, then moves into a bit of a ska song and seamlessly back into an in-your-face chorus. The dual vocals between Nick Fleming, the guitarist, and Casey Keel, the main singer and bassist, are pretty phenomenal on this one, and it kind of showcases the band's talents all over the place. I still think the opening line of "Why do you party? Because I like to dance. When do you party? When I get the chance. Let's hear it one more time for the people in the back," is probably the thing when you hear it being, kicking off this song. It's pretty much just an incredible, like, get you up and get ready to dance kind of moment. Like, even if you're just sitting by yourself, you're like, all right, now I'm good to go. This song's awesome. Also, there's a whole part that they use the Chinese finger trap as like an analogy. I think it's more of a metaphor and analogy in this than anything, but it really is pretty interesting how they talk about that. So the song is basically saying, the song's called Lucky, but it's basically about not being lucky and how, you're challenged to get through life when you're not the luckiest person in the world. But other than that, like, literally all the songs on the album are phenomenal. You'll get some incredible stories, some very, very well crafted songwriting from Keel on this one. I think he does most of the songwriting. I have to ask him, but I'm pretty sure he does most of the songwriting. But the songs that I would recommend to check out on this album, if you don't trust me to listen to the entire thing, I would first say Lucky, then their first single off the album. These are actually their 3 singles, which coincidentally enough, the first 3 songs I'm going to mention are the first 3 singles, but I would say that there's other ones on there. But check out Lucky, check out The Darkness, and check out Hypothetically. Those are all 3. They have music videos for all 3 of those as well. And then if you just haven't got enough, go check out Lies, because that's one of my favorite ones. It's literally about like how he doesn't lie, but sometimes he will, but never does, and then always does, depending on your perspective of the conversation. So that one will be, it's like watching the movie Inception. It's like, these lyrics almost don't make sense, but they perfectly do. So number 2, the second pick on this one, again, this is in no particular order, but this one is an absolute like gem. Like, I don't know how this band just dropped out of nowhere, and I'd never heard of them before, but the band is called Magazine Beach. They're from DC. Their new album is called Constant Springtime. This thing is phenomenal. I don't know exactly how to describe it. The best way I can kind of describe the band is like Taking Back Sunday. Instead of 2 male vocalists, though, it's got 1 female vocalist, 1 male vocalist, mixed with like maybe like a little bit of like even like Billie Eilish or something. Like, it's just, or maybe like Lana Del Rey. Maybe that's a better description. So like Taking Back Sunday meets Lana Del Rey, because this is an incredibly solid album. I haven't heard anything this kind of like new and refreshing for a while. But when I listened to the whole thing, I was actually on my morning bike ride and I was like, holy shit, this is incredible. So I would say my favorite part is probably that there are, it's one of the more intimate albums I've heard in a long time. And it actually reminds me of another one of their band, another band on their own label. They're both on Take This to Heart Records, which is Kali Mossy, who I've loved them. Actually, you can see them right there behind me right there. These 2 albums are Kali Mossy. Those guys are incredible as well. But the songwriting is so emotion and moment driven. Like, they're taking a moment in time, instead of kind of talking about like a relationship as a whole. It's kind of taking a moment in time and just examining that moment a lot of times, and kind of using that as a metaphor for the entire relationship, as opposed to, dragging out the timeline or whatever. But the band stands out on their own with one major component. And like I said, they have dual singers, 1 male and 1 female vocalist. So that's Angelo Leitner Weiss and Casey Rudder, respectively. And the sound is kind of, another band I would recommend, or kind of say is similar to them, is a band like Group Love, who I also really enjoy. Their new album is actually pretty good, from what I've heard so far as well. And, their last album wasn't my favorite. Group Love's wasn't, but they do have pretty good music. Now, Magazine Beach has kind of a more technical guitarist. Not that Group Love can't play guitar. They're still pretty good. But there is a lot of tapping. There's a lot of trills. There's a lot of like really cool stuff. I think there's even a few pinch harmonics on this album from Magazine Beach. It just makes it completely rocking. And, with an indie rock sound, when you add some of those high level skills of guitar into it, it's almost like you're just immediately captured. You're like, where the hell did this band come from? How are they so good? And why has nobody heard of them before? They also remind me of the first time I ever heard the Rentals, Matt Sharp's post Weezer project. Even with some of the lyrics, the Sharp mentions Virginia and being on the East Coast, which happens a few times by, in songs from this band as well. So I think, all these songs are truly great in their own right. And I really, really enjoy a couple of the first songs off the album, Bitter Sun and Totally Cool, as are great songs, even just as the singles. The one song that I'll say is absolutely pretty much fucking perfect is Window, though. Window is, from what I can tell, it's a cappella. I can't remember that there's any instruments in this thing, but if you listen to it as a single all by itself, it may not hit quite hard because you just be like, what the hell am I listening to? Why am I listening to an a cappella song? But when you listen to it in the context of the entire album and where it comes in the album, it's one of those moments where you're just like, you're jamming along, and then all of a sudden it's like a hard break. And then this thing's kind of just in there, and you realize that there's, this intimacy that you get with a band like Magazine Beach that you don't get with bigger acts that, don't have to be personal and don't have to be intimate. This is one of the moments where I would say, hey, this is a pretty perfect song, especially within the scope of the actual rest of the album. It's not like a Sugar Ray moment where, they went from speed metal to, or speed punk, metal punk, whatever you want, to the song Fly, and then all their songs later became like that. I wouldn't say they should chase down making more songs like this. I think one-offs or very few songs like this actually makes them more meaningful. So if you check this album out, about halfway through it, you're going to get to the song Window, and it's absolutely dynamite. It's done so well. So, and again, I don't want to dissect each album too much. I just want to make sure that you have an understanding of what you're about to listen to, so that way you're kind of prepared. But these albums that I'm going to recommend today are fantastic. And then obviously, if you see Megs, I don't think they even release this out on vinyl. I think they might have a cassette or maybe CDs for it, but they don't have a vinyl for it. So if you want to get it, you can get it physical copies, but make sure to go stream it for sure. And the recommended songs I would say are Bitter Sun, Totally Cool, and Window. Those ones, each one of those are phenomenal in different ways. The next one I'm going to talk about, so pick number 3 is it literally just meets the criteria because I believe it came out on the 30th of June, so literally the last day that it could qualify for this podcast. But it's actually from a Las Vegas-based band called Mercy Music. You'll see it's called What You Stand to Lose. It's their new album. You can also see 3 Mercy Music albums right behind me here. But this thing, it's their 4th studio album. And they actually have a greatest hits. So I technically have 5 of their vinyls, but this one is unbelievable. It's a bit of a concept album in the sense that there is a major reason why this album was kind of created. There is a recurring theme. I won't get into it too much. It's, personal to lead singer Brendan Schultz's life, and he hasn't specifically talked about it in public yet, so I'm not going to bring it out and highlight it. But what I will say is you get a lot of pain like you do through any of the Mercy music that you've ever heard before. There's a lot of pain, but with it, there's like hopeful and aspirational kinds of themes as well. But as Brendan has called it before, he calls it sad bastard music. But I will say that this album, it's like I said, it's heartbreaking and hopeful, but it absolutely rips. And I will say it's not just an album. This is art. It's like literally, I studied poetry when I was in college. Like I still write poetry and songs and stuff like that. But this, the only thing I can literally compare it to is when I first started reading Charles Baudelaire poems, and he was a French poet, and his writing was just so dark and personal and intimate, but also like heartbreaking. And he was one of the guys that said, like, you can't really be a great artist unless you essentially, suffer some way. Right. So like there had to be some sort of struggle. There had to be some sort of, it was like, I can't think of the exact word, but it was like, if you starve yourself of food or stop drinking water, basically, if you pull anything away from yourself that you kind of need for like an extended period of time, that's the kind of same mentality you have to write good, solid art, right? Or create good art. And that's what this reminded me of. It's one of those things where it's like, this is when you just, you see like through the fragments and pieces, it's also kind of like a Picasso painting in the sense that like you're not sure exactly what you might be looking at necessarily, but you get a sense of it. Not that it's like broken or whatever, but it's kind of like it's, you know, the surrealist thing where it's like, you know, a little hard to tell exactly what you're looking at. When you listen to this, you don't know exactly what you're hearing because it sounds incredibly upbeat, up tempo, happy. But then when you start listening and digging deep and looking into the lyrics, you realize that there's a, you know, that's all a bit of a facade because it's really pain and heartbreak that's going on for almost the entire album. And I will say, you know, these songs are, you know, not just about, you know, pain, but they're self-sabotage, they're rejection, they're spiraling, and they're coming out as lethal injections to love songs in general. So basically, if you think like this sounds like a love song, it sounds like it's written in a happy way towards, you know, a woman. It's actually quite the opposite. It's I won't call it a hate song or hate songs because they're never that. It's that relationship, right, between love and hate, and there's a spectrum, and it goes like a roller coaster back and forth, right? So one really, really cool thing about this album is every guitar flare that Brendan Schultz puts on it, every bass line that bassist Jared Cooper puts on it, every drum track that, you know, Ryan Martin puts on it. They're incredibly tight. They're some of the best musicians in the punk genre, even though I don't technically consider them punk. I would consider them a pop rock band, or, you know, just like rock music that has a pop flair to it. But these guys are phenomenal musicians, and I really can't say enough about this album. Like it's definitely one of my top favorite albums in the last 5 to 10 years, probably. And the band actually did this whole album in 10 days at the Blasting Room with Bill Stevenson, who's obviously from the Descendants and all. And, you know, I know that Brendan idolized Bill Stevenson and idolizes Bill Stevenson for most of his life. So the fact that he finally got to work with him and get guidance from him, you know, it basically took them what they always have had and just pushed them even further to get to that limit that they could basically push themselves to. So it's, you know, one of these albums that proves that there are bands out there that can create music better than almost anything you've ever heard, even if you've never heard of this band before. So I highly recommend, highly recommend you go check out Mercy Music, What You Stand to Lose. And if you want 3 songs, just go check out their first 3 singles, which are Suddenly, Found Out I'm Useless, and then Love You, Need You. But also check out the last song on the album, Waiting to Begin, because it is sad, but it's also like one of those things that, like, you know, it has a lot of catharsis in it. But it's very good. And it almost sounds like there's like an orchestra in it when you listen to it, but I think it's just the guitar making that noise, but it sounds like there's warm strings in there somehow. And you're like, I can't tell what's happening. It sounds like this is just a bigger song. It's just, I think that's the natural sound of the guitar there. So it's pretty cool. All right. Let's move on to pick number 4. Pick number 4. This one, if you've been paying attention to rock music at all in the last decade, you've probably heard of this band, Hot Mulligan, and their new album, Why Should I Watch, is absolutely freaking insane. If you haven't heard about these guys by now, this is the time to give them a listen, because this is absolutely one of their best albums and one of the best albums of the year. A lot of people will have it as the top contender. Like I've seen people say like, this is album of the year. Like, and I can't necessarily say that they're wrong. Like I will just say, like, you know, I haven't listened to Hot Mulligan as much as I probably should have up to this point. I've definitely heard them before and listened to some of their songs, but I've probably never even gone through a whole album before. But this particular album, I mean, if you go through it and just listen to it, you're not going to hear a bad song. You know, this for me, like for kids in high school right now, this would be like this song or this album coming out should resonate with the same equivalency, like, you know, Enema of the State with Blink-182, or maybe the first time I heard Taking Back Sunday, or the first time I heard Jimmy Eat World. Like these are the bands when I was younger that I was like, this is a seminal album, and Hot Mulligan's Why Should I Watch absolutely should be up for that kind of discussion in about 15, 20 years from now, because I think if people are paying attention, and I know that Hot Mulligan is touring obviously for this album. So if they're if people are catching this band live and they're buying this album and listening to this album, they're absolutely going to have that moment for themselves where they're like 15, 20 years from now, like, this is the band that I saw live. This is the album that I remembered that basically, you know, springboarded my music love for this genre. And also it was like, this was the best band of that era. So, you know, I don't know how anybody that's kind of like in a new band in the last like 5-6 years or so is really competing with Hot Mulligan as far as like, you know, hey, they're a big band that's quite gone under the radar. There's bands like Turnstile, White Reaper, for example. You know, even Mercy Music, for example, they've been around a little bit longer than 5 or 6 years, but they've been around about 10 years. But there are these bands that, you know, crop up and you're just like, how are they not like super famous? How are they not headlining, you know, these festivals and stuff like that? Because they're that good. And unfortunately, just the rock music genre focuses way too much on the 90s and not enough on the current, you know, the 2020s, I would say, or even the 2000 teens, because everybody just looks at the 90s when albums were physically sold in CDs where they could buy it, and, you know, all these records and all this money was made. That's when rock music had its heyday. Now it's kind of like a secondary or tertiary, third kind of musical genre as far as how popular the subgenres are or the genres are. But that doesn't mean the music's not good. And these bands like Hot Mulligan, Mercy Music, you know, pretty much anybody I'm going to talk about today that you haven't already heard of, they deserve to be on top billings of festivals. It's just that not enough people have heard about them because they didn't grow up and play in the 90s. So definitely check these bands out. But like I was saying, let's get back to this. You know, I think that what, you know, Why Should I Watch is objectively great. Anybody who listens to it is not going to say this is a bad album. Like, if you think that this is a bad album, you and I have absolutely nothing in common as far as music goes, because this is just insanely good. My only worry is kind of how well it holds up to, like, you know, kind of like 100 listens, right? So like, you know how you can get tired of an album after you, like, you know, listen to it a bunch, right? And I don't have a specific number, but let's just say 100 listens is kind of like a standard that you can set before you can realize that something's either timeless or it's a fad. Where, like, I know I've listened to some albums like multiple hundreds of times, and if I listen to them now, do they still hold up? If they don't, then it's like, well, that was just part of a fad, right? Now, I'll give you an example. Dude Ranch by Blink-182, great album. I've loved it my whole life. I recently went back and listened to it, and I was like, there are some things on here that I would say are not timeless. Half the album is, the other half is not. Like the shtick of the whole humor, the, you know, the sexualization of stuff in that basically wears thin pretty easily on anybody who's a grown adult. But the songs, like, you know, some of the A New Hope and stuff like that really, really do have a timeless feel to it. So that's what I'm going to try to figure out between now and basically next year for this Hot Mulligan, and even by the end of this year, to see if Hot Mulligan, this album, kind of just stays with it and it still sounds good as I play it more and more, right? So I don't think it's a fad, but I honestly think that this could be, you know, a classic album. Like in 20 years, people will be like, that album was just that great. So the fact that I'm even mentioning this is kind of shows you like how good this album is. Like, is it great, or is it just great? Like, is it great now, or is it timeless great? Like, that's how good of an album this could be for a lot of people. So I will say that there's probably one small issue and a reason why I didn't give this album a 5-star rating when I did review it. And it's just, there's like one little guitar riff in the song No Shoes in the Coffee Shop or Socks. That intro and guitar riff make me think I'm watching like Good Morning America or like the Today Show. Like, if you listen to it, there's just this little guitar riff in there. And I was just like, I don't know, something about that just sounds way too bright for what this song is and what this album is, even though it's kind of a poppy album. That guitar riff just, I don't know, it just bothered me a bit, to where it was like, this doesn't belong here. It's like inserting elevator music and then they're like, you know, playing over the top of it like it's actually a good rock riff. And I was like, I don't want to blame anybody, but I just want to say I would have changed that little guitar riff or just left it completely out. But I will say, other than that, like, such a phenomenal album. I would highly recommend go streaming this album, go buy it if they have it available. But for recommended songs, I'm literally just go pick any 3, pick one. It doesn't matter. You're going to like this album. So highly recommend that. So let's jump into pick 5, which is, this one actually came out just a couple weeks ago as well. And that's the new Queens of the Stone Age, which is called In Times New Roman. Honestly, don't know how these guys keep doing it, but might literally be their best album overall yet. And I know you're going to think that sounds like I'm an idiot for saying it because, you know, they have some really, really good albums. But it's insanely good. I don't know how to describe what I listen to when I listen to Queens of the Stone Age, because they've got that dark melodies, almost anti-melodies and anti-harmonies, where it's like you don't think that that's how the song should sound, and it just sounds like you're in a haunted house all the time, right? Like that's the best way to kind of describe Queens of the Stone Age, that all their songs kind of sound like you're in a haunted house. But it's the way that Josh Homme or Homie or however you pronounce his name seems to belt it out so seamlessly, like he was just born that way, and his voice was always like that, right? Like this album, I think, is pretty much peak form for the band. They've obviously done great things. They have incredible tracks. They have incredible albums. I don't think there's anything even close to a bad song on this album, where some of the previous albums, I will say, even as great as they were, there are one or two songs where I'm just like, that doesn't really work that well, or that's a filler song. You could tell, but this one does not seem to have it. I think there's 11 songs on this, 10 or 11 songs on this album, and every single one of them they just hit hard and they sound good. They're all different. They have experimental soundscapes in them. They have, you know, layering of instruments that just make it sound incredible. They have starts and stops in the middle of songs just to kind of like blow, like, you know, burst and bloom that kind of sound out. And you're like, wow, that's interesting. And while, you know, they kind of fit in this stoner rock genre, that's the one that like a lot of people call it stoner rock. That genre is just kind of hard to fit into words. But basically, I think what this means for Queens of the Stone Age and how they fit there is that genre specifically just seems to have free reign to create weird sounds, play dark tones, and make longer songs, basically just as needed to match the lyrics and theme of the song to the music. And man, this is like a perfect example of that concept. So you get sounds on this album from artists that span anywhere from like David Bowie all the way to Primus and any weird shit in between. And they somehow managed to restructure it and wrangle it into that style of Queens of the Stone Age that they can always pull off. So again, I don't think there's another band like these guys on the planet, because they just have this knack or this niche or whatever you want to call it. And that's why it's so cool when they pull off an album like this, right? So when it doesn't work, you know it doesn't work. But when it works, it's like, how does this work? And my God, is this good? So I think just even the first song on the album, Obscenery, is a perfect example of kind of how I just kind of describe their music. And it kicks the album off like, but seriously, don't just like stop there. Listen to this entire badass album. Recommended songs for this one, I would say Negative Space for sure. Carnivore, which is a fantastic title, but also a great song. And one of my favorites, I don't know if everybody's going to agree, but I think What the Peephole Say. So it's like What the People Say, but Peephole, What the Peephole Say. That's a really, really good song as well. I'm going to take a quick break and we will talk about the other 5 albums that I would highly recommend. So don't go anywhere. The Powered by Rock podcast will return right after this.
Reverend Guitars embodies the idea that every run of scorching lead and every roll of finger-picked twang deserve the same passion and commitment to quality. Whether you're selling out arenas or playing in your living room, we know that what makes an instrument powerful is when players wield them to create something remarkable. A melody that moves mountains, a riff that just won't quit. We want to be there in your hands when that happens. For us, that means staying true to what we believe. Somewhere along the road of electric guitar history, it became a crazy idea that guitar makers should craft guitars with the same sense of purpose and passion, whether they're played in a bedroom or an arena. If that's a wild idea, then we're in the right place, carrying 6 strings and an attitude, and we're in good company. Reverend Guitars. Well played.
Running your own music career is incredibly difficult. Trying to get people to like, share, comment, listen, follow, it's all just overwhelming. Most musicians give up before they ever achieve success, and that's the worst. If you're looking for a better way to grow your music career, head to DIYrockcareer.com for some absolutely free training. It costs you nothing, and it could be the difference between hitting your goals and quitting your dream. Go to DIYrockcareer.com today by clicking the link below this episode.
Then I lost my way.
Welcome back to the Powered by Rock podcast, where I'm going to be talking about the next 5 albums from the top 10 rock albums of the first half of 2023. We talked about Hot Mulligan, Magazine Beach, Mercy Music, Wicked Bears, and Queens of the Stone Age so far. So let's jump into number 6, or just pick 6. It's not ranked in any way, but This one comes from one of my absolute favorite bands of all time, but especially of recently. Another band that I think should definitely be, one of these headliners of festivals right now, and that's Decent Criminal. And you can see they got a little handwritten note there from lead singer Tristan Martinez, who's super awesome. This band is incredible. Their new album is called "There's More to It Than Climbing." Decent Criminal is quite possibly the most underrated band in the current rock scene. They straddle that line of punk and grunge pretty perfectly. That most bands try to like be grungy, but then also want to be in a punk band because that's like the more I guess topical or more current form of rock than the genre of grunge. Grunge kind of only really had a heyday for like 6 years back in the 90s, and then kind of just dragged out and kind of faded into obscurity. But a lot of bands are picking it back up, which is great. Grunge it always has been one of my favorite genres. It's just the way that it got kind of corporatized and desensitized and became less punk. It kind of got pretty stale quickly with some of the bands that made it later on, in my opinion. But anyway, Decent Criminals version of grunge and punk is incredibly well done. It's on par, if not better, than some of the best bands like Nirvana and stuff like that. So I won't say this band is, you're gonna like be like, oh, this is a band that's equally as good as Nirvana. I'm not saying that. Like, I personally like them just as much as Nirvana, if not more. But not everyone's going to have that same taste. And for some people, they just got their heads up their own asses that Nirvana is like the greatest band of all time, which is clearly not the case. But if you believe that, that's great for you. Like, I really do like Nirvana. It was one of those bands that was one of my favorite bands of all time when they were around. And since then I've grown to like a lot more other bands, but at the time Nirvana was definitely one of my favorite bands. But with Decent Criminal, this is their 4th studio album. You'll actually see some of their music behind me there too. So there's one there and then another one there. So a few vinyls I've got from them as well. I would say that with this one, it has a great mix of their first 3 albums, in my opinion. Like, it's got some of the laid back stuff from their first album. And then it's got some of the harder stuff from their second album. And then it's got some of those like catchier pop kind of driven tunes from their 3rd album that when it put it all together, like, there's more to it than climbing. You could tell that there's a pretty extended shift in the second half of this album, as far as going from like, some of the stuff they've done before to what is going on now. But, that's kind of what happens when you've made music for 10, 15, 20 years and you have 4 albums that now have been out and they all have to have a different sound. Like, you can't make 4 of the exact same albums or else you're going to have pretty boring albums, in my opinion. But the 2 songs that I would specifically highly recommend are quite possibly the 2 best songs they've ever done, which are Driving and Soothe. So these are reminiscent of their second album, Bloom, which is personally my favorite album, which is that one right there. But they're just, because they just rip so hard. They're just so good. When they make music that's high tempo, high energy, and up tempo like this, honestly, it's the best version of their songs. But that said, you can't just have all the songs sound like that, because if you did, they wouldn't kind of have that, that ebb and flow of how the songs fit together. If you just had 10 songs like that, it wouldn't be as good. But when I messaged lead singer Tristan Martinez to tell him that Soothe is their best song that they ever made, because I quote, "It is shit my pants good." And he laughed about that. But the album starts out with a bit of an intro song with the song Outside, which it's definitely a full song, but it has only like guitar and vocal, and runs for about 1:48. But it reminds me a lot of that song Riverside from their first album. And I think there was one on their second album too that had like just acoustic as well from memory, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But it just shows that like the new stuff that they're putting out, they're not just relying on kind of one theme or one sound. And then once Driving and Soothe come in, it gets going, right? It's like incredible. The energy is up tempo and it just starts rocking. By the end of it, I think it's the last song on the album from memory, but it might not be. Let me check. Does it have it on here? Yeah. Hold Me Down is the last song on the album. That song is freaking phenomenal as well. That's a great end of the record. I would highly recommend that song. I will say that there's a couple of things that I wish kind of, if I had my way as a huge fan of this band, I would say that if they were to make this like the perfect LP, I would have added their single Summer Trip, which they released last year as a single. I thought it was going to be on the album. I don't know why it wasn't, but it wasn't. I would have also added Reap from their 2021 DC EP, so the Decent Criminal EP, and then Dream, which is on their new 7-inch split with Direct Hit. And while I like the version of Time that's on this album, I actually kind of like the version of Time that's on that split as well. So there's a couple of things where I'm just like, which one is the kind of standard version? Which one's kind of the cooler version? Which one's kind of more LP versus EP friendly? Those are just my personal opinions, but I think if those things were on there, like this would have been a 5 out of 5, 100%. Like it would have been an absolutely perfect album in my opinion. So even without those songs appearing and just the album as is and having those songs be on, separate releases, this is still absolutely an album of the year contender. So again, the recommended songs for this album, Driving and Soothe, absolutely check them out. And then Hold Me Down. If you don't, if you don't believe that it's good after those two songs, you can check out Hold Me Down as well. And by the way, Hold Me Down and a lot of the second half of that album are kind of polar opposite of the first side of that album. So like instead of being up tempo and high energy, it's kind of more laid back and smooth, and just the way it sounds is pretty good. Pick number 7. I do not have the vinyl for this. I think they have a vinyl for this. I'll have to get it because, I know that Sam King, he lives here in town. I think with Fat Mike as well. So this is Co-Defendants. This is Crime Wave. If you haven't heard this, like I actually, did have Sam King on the podcast earlier this year to talk about this, and had a huge response from Get Dead and Sam King fans and Chesky Ramos fans and Fat Mike fans, and absolutely pretty much everybody loves this album, and for good reasons. Like this is an incredible album filled with songs that it's basically like nothing that you really heard before. When the album is called This Is Crime Wave, it's actually a reference to the genre that Sam King, the lead singer or co-lead singer, who's also in Get Dead, basically says like, this is the genre. Crime Wave is the genre because there was no other way to describe it. And when he's like, how I describe it to people is this is Crime Wave, and just leaves it at that. So that's why it's called This Is Crime Wave. So if you want to know what the genre is, it's Crime Wave. We'll call it a subgenre of rock, but that's Crime Wave, right? But I think if you really want to get the gist of this album, I would go straight to the song Brutiful. So it's like brutal and beautiful and smashed into one word. And that is just an absolute gem of a song, written with a lot of pain behind it, but also given that aspiration of light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of these songs have been infused with the kind of past legal experiences of both King and Ramos. Ramos was actually imprisoned over a marijuana charge in Connecticut. And King has basically disliked the law and law enforcement since he was a kid. Basically, cops would harass him, his family, his mom, and stuff like that. She even got put in jail for not registering her car or having her registration up to date when she was working 2 jobs and had 3 kids. Like some of the stuff that like goes on in law enforcement is just absolutely absurd. To jail people for stuff like that, it's just insane. It seems more like criminal activity than just not registering your license, right? But basically that distrust in police and the criminal justice system made a bond between these guys that fully comes alive in this music. And for the full effect, I would highly encourage you to watch the music videos that the Co-Defendants put together with the Anonymous Street Team, In Decline. I think it's 5 music videos that go kind of in chronological order or in some sort of order. It's kind of like watching Quentin Tarantino or like Pulp Fiction, where like, even if they don't go in order, you can kind of piece together what's happening and understand that like there's some shitty people out there doing shitty things. And you start with Suicide by Pigs, in my opinion, and you can kind of jump around, but it does have part 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. It's also worth noting that Brendan Schultz from Mercy Music has a prominent role in this, and Jared Cooper from Mercy Music has a small part as well. So you get a little cameos and Easter eggs in those as well. So there's kind of a cool little interconnected music community there. I don't think they've even met the Co-Defendants. I think they're just friends with the same people, so they're in there. But the line that stands out most from the whole album actually comes from the song Suicide by Pigs. In the refrain, turning pipe dreams into pipe bombs with you. Like as that's being sung, you're just like, man, and especially if you're watching the video, you're just like, damn, that song, that lyric itself hits pretty hard. So again, this is what art looks like in music form, right? The way that they take it from music to put it to visual media as well, like it matches pretty damn well. And it's just an overall great combination and just fits so good. And the album itself is excellent as well. So again, tracks that I'd recommend: Brutiful, Suicide by Pigs, Suckers. I mean, honestly, like there's more on there. Like I feel like every song on that album is really good. So just check it out. Pick number 8. So we're just got 3 left. So pick number 8 is actually White Reaper, Asking for a Ride. I did mention them earlier, I think, when I was talking about Hot Mulligan. And White Reaper is a band that I've been following for a while. I kind of thought they were going to be like a fad band that you only kind of heard once or twice and then they go away, just because it sounded too good to be true. I was like, these guys are going to be like Fall Out Boy's first album. They're going to get big or kind of hit a radio hit, and then they're going to make trash. But man, was I wrong, and I'm glad I was, because Asking for a Ride, it was one of my most anticipated albums of 2023, and it did not disappoint. This thing was so freaking good. But they managed to, like, I don't know how they do it, but they managed to take heavy metal riffs and create like a punk rock sound more than anything. And it's like one of the best combinations of sounds in any band in modern rock, right? So in my opinion, bands like White Reaper creating the music that they create, rock music has a pretty damn bright future ahead, because not only do they create great music, but they're also high energy on stage too. So that's what you want. You want like the full performance, right? The rock music's been around for just under 100 years, 80 years or so, 80, 90 years, depending on when you pick up and say this is where it was created. But there's just like this wave of high end performers you can kind of draw a line through and see kind of how they're connected. I feel like White Reaper belongs right in that kind of line of, these bands that just, they do things that make people want to just party, like just go crazy during their songs, right? I'm not saying that like people are punching each other in the head, but like when you listen to White Reaper music, you're not just going to be standing still in the corner like, I don't like this. Like they just have that kind of infectiousness about them, right? And if you want to hear a dose of what White Reaper offers on this album, go check out their first single, Fog Machine, and just basically have a good 3-minute dance party wherever you are, because it's an absolute banger. I'm not sure there are many bands on the planet that rock harder than White Reaper right now. I just don't have that many other ways to state that. Like there's a few that I really like Death by Unga Bunga, some of the bands I'm talking about here today. But when you see, bands just rock out, right? Like White Reaper's high on that list. And then obviously there's more popular bands that have bigger crowds that kind of go harder because they have more people that might show up. But, person for person, White Reaper can hold their own with anyone. So again, recommended songs for this album, so many good ones. But Fog Machine, like I said, Pages, great song. Asking for a Ride, which is the title track, and then Crawl Space. All 4 of those songs I would say are going to be amazing. Pick number 9. This is actually from a band from LA who I have had the, privilege to get to know over the last couple of years. This band's called Raised on TV. Their new album is called Strangers in Pictures. That's actually the drummer right there, Casey. He is chilling out like a beach bum. But this is their 4th album, and this, I think it's the best one that they've put together so far overall. This is the first time they've actually released a vinyl. It's through Sell the Heart Records, which Andy, I basically, Keaton, the lead singer from Raised on TV, basically said, "Hey man, do you know anybody who might like to put this album out?" And I said, "I got a couple of people that I know. I'll send it to them and see what they say." And I sent it to Andy from Sell the Heart Records, and he was basically like, I was like, "I don't know, like they're all recording themselves, so maybe you think that it needs to be done again or whatever." And he's like, "This is perfect. This is good as is. I want to release this." This album is, like I said, it's definitely overall, I think, their best album, where some of their other albums have really, really good songs, and then it kind of struggles a little bit here or there, but this one does not struggle anywhere. It's really good songs all the way through. Keaton Rogers, the lead singer and guitar player, he's a song making machine. He actually does a lot of this stuff himself. Like he'll put the bass together and stuff like that, keys and all that stuff. And then basically it's a 2-man band that just kind of tries to get other people to play with them, but it's hard to keep, people in the band when they're committed to other bands or whatever. So every once in a while they'll bring a 3rd member in and then they'll leave. But pretty much the entire existence of the band has been a two-person band between Keaton and Casey, their brothers. And, as they create these tracks, you don't get the feel that it's a 2-person band. And when you watch them live, they actually even have like a backing track for the bass that they have to stay in time with and stuff, which is pretty incredible as well. But if you haven't heard of Raised on TV, you might get a sense of who they are if you take like the Strokes, Jimmy Eat World, and then like get those pieces for the bread and then have the Shins in the middle for like a Shins sandwich with the Strokes and Jimmy Eat World on either side. And then just blend that all up and drink it down, because those are some of the sounds you're going to get. So if you like any of those bands, I have a feeling you'll dig these guys for sure. And I'll say that, like I said, you know, the other albums have like a good amount of songs on there that I really like, but every once in a while there's a song that just doesn't hit right. This one has, I would say, all the way through really good songs. The Race is probably my second favorite album on this song, and it's up-tempo speed along with a metallic sounding guitar that, like, I don't even know how to describe it. It sounds weird. It just sounds like a metallic guitar. That makes me want to rock out and just start moshing around, right? Which that song is then followed by The Fire, which is probably my favorite song on the album. And I'd put this up there with one of their, you know, my personal favorite is Helium from their last album, Fernando. I would put that song, The Fire, and The Race right up there as, you know, my favorite songs from this album and from the band. And then there's a really, really cool song called Between Highs and Lows, which it's not just a good song, but it's like, it's different enough to kind of like change your perspective on what the band is. I just think it's a really, really good song. And it kind of fits in that Jimmy Eat World vibe for me, that like you didn't expect this song, and then all of a sudden it's there and you're like, that's actually a really, really cool song. So I would say listen, especially pay attention to the guitar on those songs, Between Highs and Lows and The Race. Guitar on those are both great as well. And I actually got to see them recently. That's why I got their album signed as well. So they are awesome to watch live. And again, another one of these bands that I highly recommend. You know, they're not a young band necessarily, but they are a band that's kind of newer to being a band. I think they're only maybe 5-6 years as a band together, but they just absolutely rock. Also, another song that I want to mention is Losing My Mind, which I've heard this song, I feel like, for a while now. Like, I feel like they've played it for a long time, and I would say that's a really, really good song as well. So recommended songs: The Race, The Fire, Between Highs and Lows, and Losing My Mind. And definitely go buy a vinyl. Sell the Heart Records, Raised on TV. Go get these guys. It's a great song, or a great album with great songs. Strangers in Pictures. Pick number 10. Another band I was fortunate enough to see recently, and when I listened to this album, this is a band that is kind of up there with White Reaper for me. The only difference is their live performance isn't as energetic. It's enigmatic in a way, though. Like, just watching these guys play, and the band I'm talking about is Bass Drum of Death, and their new album, Say I Won't. It's absolutely killer. I would highly recommend this album. It is just power rock. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. This thing is just like Bass Drum of Death. Like, that name, their name of the band, kind of gives you a signature kind of sound in your head. That's kind of what you can expect. They're not metal. They're not like, you know, Slipknot or something like that you may think of, but like it's very powerful. This is their 5th album, so it's not like these guys are brand new or anything. I think they're based out of New York now, but they were originally from Mississippi. So like, they've got like these influences that not a lot of modern rock bands have, because not a lot of modern rock bands are, you know, from the South, like Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, necessarily. Well, I shouldn't say Tennessee, but, you know, Arkansas, that kind of area. But the sound is just, you can feel like the hard, but then like, it's just got these great melodies. You know, so like, you know, when they have lyrics that are like, you know, meaningless or muddy, kind of confusing, you don't really understand what the songs are about. Like, it doesn't really matter, because the music's not necessarily about what you understand about the song. It's about how you understand how it makes you feel, or how it makes you want to do something. Right. So it's, you know, and it's intentional. Like, they don't necessarily describe a situation. They don't have the, you know, the nitty gritty detail of songwriting where they're trying to describe an entire scene or anything like that. It's not about that with Bass Drum and Death. Like, they know what they have. They're really fucking good at it. And they just absolutely bang out these songs like nobody's business. And like I said, the melodies are unreal. So I think the best song on the album, in my opinion, is Say Your Prayers. I think they might have released that as a single as well. But from what I can get of it, it's a self-reflection song about, being haunted by both guilt and regret, which usually is a pretty good, I feel like there's a lot of songs that have that theme that I really am drawn to, even though I'm not filled with necessarily a life of guilt and regret. But like, I think every person, especially, I guess this is why men have middle-age crisis, right? Like at a certain age, people are like, oh my God, I haven't done this yet. I want to do this. Like, what am I doing with my life? I wish I'd have done that. I feel bad about this thing that I did in my past. Like there's this time of reflection that comes in your life. And like right now at this point in my life, once I got past like 30, 32, 33, started listening to more music that kind of incorporated these themes. And it just becomes really, really good. And lead singer John Barrett actually said it's about temptation and succumbing to it and the consequences of that. So if that kind of speaks for itself. So like, you don't always make the right decisions when you're being tempted, right? So you have to find a way to say no when you really want to say yes. Anyway, the song was created in collaboration with Mike Kerr, which is the drummer from Royal Blood. And it kind of explains the song in a lot of ways, but it keeps their style like their own as well. And the whole album, again, is just absolutely fantastic. If I had more time to write, further or tell you more about this, and the whole album is just like absolutely fantastic. And if I had 12 hours to explain it to you, I'd definitely bore the shit out of you. But that's kind of like what I would say is like, I couldn't say enough things good about this album. That's absolutely awesome. So recommended songs from this album are Say Your Prayers, Wait, Find It, and Swerving. All really, really good songs. And of course, these albums are not the only good albums of the year by any means, but these albums are the ones I would highly recommend you go check out right now, for many reasons, but especially to highlight some independent musicians. Go check out the show notes below this episode to get the links to these albums, as well as 10 more honorable mentions that I absolutely love, but don't have enough time to talk about today as well. I'm also going to chuck in 3 EPs of some Las Vegas bands that I highly recommend as well, because if you like the full albums above, then I think you'll almost certainly like these 3 EPs as well. And again, remember, the Powered by Rock podcast is powered by our listeners. To show us some support, please be sure to subscribe and share the podcast on social media. You can also click below to make a donation to the podcast to help us keep making some awesome episodes with awesome guests. You can see the full video interview on our YouTube channel and Spotify as well now. If you want to check out some of our awesome content or our merch and gear, head to poweredbyrock.com to see what's good there. That's our show for today. I'll see you soon for the next episode. Until then, rock on.